Hey everyone, I just wanted to give you kind of a quick overview of the Wildland Urban Interface home project that you guys are going to be doing. I'm going to kind of walk you through what one of those would look like and point out to some of the things that you should be thinking about. So I have been given permission to go ahead and use a home out here in the WUI to give you a feel of the sort of things that we would be considering when we're thinking through Wildland Urban Interface. So you can tell this is Wildland Urban Interface because, as you can see, around the house there's a lot of open space. This is what the house looks like in the backyard. So you can see there's a pretty decent area that is pretty wild. So when we think about the types of things we need to be thinking through in a home, we think in terms of zones. So the first zone is the zone right against the house, and then we kind of move away from the structure. So when you think in terms of how a fire operates, how well protected a house is really depends upon how close the fire can get and the types of materials and the types of structure that we're working with. So we're going to first talk through this particular home's actual structure. You can see that we've got stucco here. Stucco is pretty fire resistant. Stucco, rock, brick, anything that's fairly non-burnable is a great exterior. If they have wood siding, wood is pretty flammable. So we'd want to be really cautious of a wood structure. Also in this particular house, you can see that they have these open vents. Those vents can allow embers to actually get up into that attic crawl space. So this house would want to put some sort of barrier over those vents that would still allow for the ventilation. That ventilation is really important for the home, but we would also want to be thinking through stopping embers from getting into it. Now this home has a pretty decent sized walkway around it, and most of the plants are actually on the end, and they're in pots. They're not overly grown. So this actually isn't that bad for a fire, although some of these wood pots would not necessarily be great if this area caught on fire. Those could actually ignite and get heat up into those vent spaces. Now this pergola is really great for keeping this house cool in the hot times, and this is made of metal, so this is not going to burn. If they had wood, wood against the home is actually considered a big way for fire to intrude into the home. The other thing I want us to think about is, what is their hillscape looking like? Now they've got ice plant here. Ice plant is a good landscaping plant. It has a lot of moisture in it. It doesn't burn as much. And you can also see that the trees are a little bit away. They've got some clearance around. There's a couple trees that are a little bit closer. But you'd want to be thinking in terms of how far away that fire in that tree is. So that's an important point that we want to be thinking through. Now there is a tree that actually is over the roof of the house. This lovely tree here, it's actually pretty close to the house. This is actually something that if there was a fire coming up, we might be concerned about. Now this home is up a hill, and we know from our fire behavior that it tends to come uphill. And so if a fire were to be coming up this hill, and the wind tends to drive up this hill, you can probably see my hair blowing in that wind, that tree is going to be a point where that fire is going to come into this area around the home. Now if we go over to this edge over here, this is where the home actually starts to get into some issues. Now a quick fix is they could actually just grab these cushions and throw them in the garage. And so that would reduce fire in this area. These plastic sunscreens can be problematic as a potential fire hazard as well. But their patio doesn't have a lot of stuff. There's a little bit of schmutz over here. A lot of stuff that's actually going to be flammable. They also don't have any pet doors. Pet doors is another way that embers actually get into the homes. They have double paned windows. Those are pretty fire resistant. Again, this pergola over this porch area is actually metal. So that's really going to help. One of the big issues for this particular home is actually their neighbor. I'm going to pan you a video here. So you don't have control over who your neighbors are. This is one thing that's just a fact when it comes to fire prevention. This home is set 30 feet back from the edge of the property, which when it was built was what the legal regulations are. But the neighbor actually is treating their back area as wild. And you can see here that this is pretty overgrown. Lots of dead stuff in this area. So all that overgrowth is going to be a tinderbox for a fire. There's also a canyon in here. That's part of the reason why this property is probably not maintained, is that canyon is actually hard to maintain. But that canyon is going to act as basically a giant chimney for the fire to just go swoop up it, since this is the dominant wind direction, is up this hill. So that's actually a real issue. There's nothing that this property can do about their neighbors. And because this is a private road and on private land, CAL FIRE is not actually able to come up and do anything about it either. So one of the other big issues that is on this property is this wood fence, which actually attaches to the home. There's some research that shows that a wood fence attached to the home is actually one of the #1 ways that a home catches fire from wildland-urban interface. So this fence isn't actually doing anything other than acting as a screen barrier for some of their water tanks and stuff. There are other things that they could do. They could, if it was in their budget, swap this out for a metal fence. That's not going to burn. They could get rid of it altogether. But either way, this wood fence is actually one of the biggest issues on this particular property. And again, just to kind of give you a feel of how this property is, you can see kind of the landscape. It's got a pretty decent hill here. So if that fire was coming up this way, those trees would probably get it. But this house is far enough back from the edge of that hill, from the edge of that cliff, that the fire probably wouldn't overly impact it if it's a low-grade fire. Now, this is a wind-driven fire. There's really not a lot you can do. Anyways, over here on the side of the house, this is coming up the hill. So this is the top part of the house. They do have quite a bit of landscaping that is actually pretty close to the house. They might want to consider trimming this back. There's some dead stuff in here that probably needs to get cleaned out. But most of this actually looks like it's fairly well taken care of and watered, so that will help with it as well. If we continue looking up the hill, you can see there's a road break there, and over there around the house, there's still a lot of space around this house. So, while it's not 100%, there's still things that can be done on this property to help improve it. This house isn't in bad shape. It's got a good roof. It's got good material for the sides. It really does need to protect those vent holes to the inside of the attic, but it picked the metal is a really good way to do that pergola. And of course, the biggest issue is working with their neighbors. One of the other things is that there's a lot of wood bark chips on this property, which is kind of a double-edged sword. The wood bark chips is actually helping prevent a lot of weed growth, which is really good. You don't want a lot of weed growth like what you see over in the next door neighbor's property, but wood chips are actually still flammable. Now, one of the big benefits on this particular property is that they've done a great job keeping the underbrush under these trees fairly maintained. Hoping you can see that. There's all that nice open space under those trees. Some of this tree could get actually trimmed up a little bit, and that would help too. You want to think in terms of fire height. So we call anything on the ground that can help the fire get into the treetops ladder fuels. And they've done a pretty good job in almost all the places of maintaining their ladder fuel. I'm going to show you another part of this property that's close to that house as well. So you can see, again, over here, underneath these trees, is still pretty clear. Although there is a bit of leaf that could get cleaned up, that fluff in the leaf can actually be a fire hazard as well. So as you're going out and you're looking at the 2 homes that you need to look at, make sure they're in the WUI. We want them close to the wildlands. That's part of the assignment. But I wanted you to have a chance to have somebody talk you through what you want to be looking at when you're thinking about these houses, the different aspects of the house you want to be considering. You know, you don't want to have a lot of plants and bushes up against the house. Between 6 and 9 feet away is the ideal as a buffer zone. You want to make sure there's not a lot of brush buildup around a house. You want to make sure they're maintaining the landscaping. All of that's actually going to help reduce fires. The fact that there's not a lot of trees over the top of these homes is really important because that means there's not a lot of leaves getting into the gutters. And I know this property owner actually cleans out their gutters pretty often. So I hope this was helpful, and have a good one.